Really appreciate it, and we really appreciate the Commerce Bank for sponsoring this event today. So next, I would love to introduce to you Pat Arcady. Pat, I'm going to make you the spotlight speaker.
Okay.
All right. And Pat is going to talk about how to cultivate high-performing teams. And she has a great presentation today. So Pat, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Great, thanks. Let me, okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day, or maybe you were looking forward to a break. We all are in different circumstances, strange as they continue to be. Just like Renee suggested, I give a little thing about my background. If you read the blurb, you have that. I don't want to bore you with that, but my specialty is really working with managers and leaders and their teams in small and medium-sized organizations, really helping them cultivate their own leadership skills and helping them do what needs to get done to really cultivate the kind of quality workplace where people can really show up and do their best work. So often there are just nuanced things you can do, and then other things, there are big things you can do. But those are the kinds of things that I enjoy working with people with and helping them realize. So today, that's what I'm going to try to share with you in a condensed piece of time and give you a high overview of a particular body of work. And then you'll be put into small rooms where breakout rooms where you can talk with one another, share some ideas. Then we'll come back and just do a quick summary. And so without any other blah, blah, let's get going. So the purpose for today is really to share the core characteristics of work in the workplace that support workers and teams really being able to do their best work. A Gallup poll of 2018, why is it important, is what people want to know. Well, only 34% of workers report being engaged. And if you think about engagement, it means high performance and productivity, that you also have better customer engagement, things like fewer accidents on the job, and 21% higher profitability are just a few of the characteristics of high performing teams where there's high engagement. And also what you might be interested, you may have not thought of or known before, is that 70% of variance in team engagement is due to the quality of the manager or the team leader. So we all as leaders have a vested interest, I think, in becoming really understanding emotional intelligence, understanding basic core things about what motivates knowledge workers to do their best. The work today I'm going to talk about is based on David Rock's book, Your Brain at Work. It's a very easy read, but it's very substantive, based on new brain research. There are two themes from social neuroscience. One is that an organizing principle of the brain is that we are hardwired to minimize threat and maximize reward. And that the human brain is actually a social organ whose reactions are directly shaped by the kinds of interactions we have with one another. Some people may find that new information. It's profound what's happening in the neuroscience research that is substantiating these kinds of things. So let's look at that a little bit. What does that mean? So to minimize danger and maximizing reward. So if you think about it with these arrows, notice that the red arrow, which is avoiding threat, is a much stronger response than is the reward arrow of when we go towards something that's pleasant. So it is a survival instinct. I'm not going to go into the details of, many of you might know something about brain, but this has to do with the amygdala and such, the deep brain. But we react to people and one another in much the same way as our need for food and water. So social threats and rewards actually activate the brain's pain and pleasure center. And that literally, if you were to put your touch accidentally in your hand, that the center in the brain that lights up and registers that that pain is the same place that activates when someone's experiencing a social threat. And that can be through language, that can be through behavior, someone ignoring you, or any number of things. So this is what's so fascinating about this, that where the brain lights up in response to things. We're seeing there are lots of data now that show how the brain is wired and how this impacts us. So we have David Rock looked at years and years of research, and he's very good at collating information. He started out as a science reporter, and now he runs the Neuro Leadership Institute out in New York. But he came up with the idea that there are 5 domains that activate either the primary reward or the primary threat circuitry in our brains. So he called it the SCARF model because it's an acronym. So the 5 components are the notion of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, right? That can either move us toward someone or avoiding someone or situation. And if you think about what I just said earlier, the research is now showing that while, if you remember from Psych 101 class in high school or college, social needs used to be is up here, but Maslow may have gotten that wrong. That in fact, a lot of the social needs are actually basic needs so that we can feel safe, so that we can move up that hierarchy, just as an aside. So what is it? What does this look like in terms of what is a toward response? That is what engagement can be about. And engagement is, we measure are people willing to do the difficult things, step up and take on new and exciting tasks, and sometimes even the grungy tasks. But they'll take risks. When we're engaged, we think deeply and we develop new solutions. We enjoy doing what we're doing. And these things are linked to interest and happiness, joy, and desire. But people experiencing positive emotions at work do a much better job at problem solving. They're more willing to collaborate, and their just overall performance is higher. So this is why all of us interested in workforce development have a vested interest in creating the kinds of environments that will get us where we want to go. What does a threat response look like? Well, when you sense threat, executive functioning decreases. This is measured by the amount of glucose and oxygen that go to the prefrontal cortex in the front of our brains. And that those things decrease, which then inhibits our ability to have insights and have kind of ahas about something. When we are under threat, we have a tendency to generalize more, react defensively. I'm hoping some of you are ticking in your brain a situation, either you've done it or you've recently seen someone that you work with do these kinds of things. Small stressors are likely perceived as large stressors when someone's under threat, under a lot of tension. So these are really important reasons to be thinking about what can you do as a team member and as a leader to modify your behavior in ways that will help decrease the amount of threat type of behavior and increase the amount of positive behavior. All right. So the better we understand our own and others' reactions, the more intentional we can be in terms of how we structure our workplaces and our interactions with each other. And I agree with David Rock, and this is, you probably have read some of this too, that this falls under the umbrella of emotional intelligence. And this is one of, even the futurists are talking about this capacity is really going to be one of the distinguishing characteristics of leadership as we go forward. So let's look at the 5 characteristics just a little bit. So status, it has to do with how we see ourselves in relative importance to others. It's always comparative, right? Both by perception and by either designation or rank at work. let me say a little more about that first. High status correlates with human longevity and health. And so we're biologically programmed to actually care about status because it favors our survival. So I've worked in a Fortune 100 company that was structured more like a European feudal system than a friendly workplace environment. Maybe some of you are in those kinds of organizations or have been there or are eagerly avoiding them. But depending on your structure determines how people will respond well to environment. Some people do well in a very highly structured environment. A lot of knowledge workers, particularly in the kind of sciences that you're in and the creativity processes, do better where they're more invited to be engaged in things, and there's less about a caste system than there is about shared decision-making and understanding. So examples of ways to increase perceived status with notions of trusting and empowering your teams to self-organize. This comes out of the lean movement and agile. I did agile coaching for about 4 years, and with IT folks in particular, as well as leadership people. And the overarching idea here is to give people the what and the why as the leader, and then leave the how up to them. Knowledge workers appreciate being able to really bring the full force of their problem-solving issues to the table. And sometimes even engaging them in the what conversation can be very strategic in engaging your people. Giving meaningful praise publicly, not just cursory. Here's one that rattles people sometimes, the idea of paying people more for the new skills they acquire as they're in their job, rather than just the longevity for which they're on they're at that organization. Encourage and support new skill development. Do you provide money and time for people to go take a course or go to a professional meeting and join organizations and things like that? So these help to bolster the sense of status. The second characteristic is the notion of certainty, right? The ability to predict the near future. Our brain is a pattern-seeking predictability machine. It likes to be able to know what's coming. And if you look at this bridge, I picked this picture purposefully in that, if I imagine that in that river there underneath are alligators, and they're not my friend, and I look at the kind of clickety-clack wooden structure, not so safe, not confident, but then I see the strong cabling going along there. So maybe I have more than a 50-50 chance of getting across. I don't know, but I know it's not going to be like walking along a cement bridge in downtown Portland. So and if you think of each of these 5 characteristics, we're all on a continuum. My degree of certainty that what I need in order to take the risk to cross this bridge could be very different from you, could be similar. Everybody falls differently on their continuums. So, but we're always looking for ways to make sense of what's going to be happening very immediately in our near future. Now, we create, so once the brain sees a pattern over and over again, it goes on automatic pilot, it recognizes that pattern, and it decides what it is. So if you think about when you first learned to drive, all the concentration it took to start the car and adjust your mirrors, and you were very aware of how the seating and all that, and you certainly weren't holding something and a cup of coffee, or soda and drinking that while you were learning to drive. But now you can get in, well, you don't get in your car because we don't go anywhere. But when you used to drive, you go on automatic pilot. You may get to work and you may not remember that you got there because your brain is doing other things. The reason a brain does that is it conserves energy by going on automatic pilot. Now, uncertainty requires extra energy. So in this kind of an environment we're in with this pandemic, a very caustic political environment, an economic, huge uncertainties as to how we're going to get through this, that takes up extra energy, which leaves less energy for the prefrontal cortex to be doing good problem solving on for the tasks at hand. So just to understand that people's brains work this way can be very helpful in terms of the kinds of expectations we set for one another in these highly uncertain times. And really understand that it is brain-based, that too much uncertainty undercuts the ability of people to focus and to perform their best. At the same time, there are things we can do to build certainty, right? So sharing business plans. If you're in one of the kinds of organizations, not sure whether it's on hold, whether it will be able to survive, to even be able to share with people what it is you know up until now, is very helpful for people to at least understand and have a sense of trust that they're going to be in the know as things go on and as things change. Explaining rationales for change, very helpful in helping people to understand. Articulating how decisions are made. And really being as transparent as you can on the things that really matter to people, which are these kinds of things. The Harvard Business Review published a study a few years ago on the effects of downsizing, and they found that there was when things were explained well, there was less fallout for a negative reaction to changes that were made than when people just have decisions handed down to them. So just think for a minute of how that's impacted you in your work life at any point in time. And you can sort of understand then how other people could be reacting. The third characteristic is the idea of autonomy, which is that, that we have a sense of control, we have a sense of agency in our lives and over events that are happening to us. And it's the freedom to be able to carry out your work without somebody looking over your shoulder. And what's interesting to me is you experience that you have a choice. And, we sometimes hear the term micromanage. And one thing that will shut knowledge workers down very well is when they feel micromanaged. And I was working with a team of architects and doing this and some other leadership things. And finally, one gentleman had an insight and he said, I just realized that my need for autonomy clashes with my boss's need for certainty. And I thought that was a terrific reframe for the idea of micromanaging. So people, we don't really feel comfortable being able to going up to our boss and saying, hey, I wish you would stop micromanaging me. But I think we can go and talk to one another about the idea of how much certainty do you need in order to be able to trust that I know what I'm doing? And let me see how I can give you what you need so that you can give me what I need, which is more autonomy. So this is why I love doing this kind of work, because we can empower people to have the language as well as the concepts to find ways to work more effectively together. And then autonomy, having greater autonomy helps increase the feelings of certainty and reduces stress. So I invite you to just take a minute and reflect on one of these two questions. And if you can, just jot a couple of ideas down, because otherwise they'll just kind of go out of your brain. So when is too much uncertainty a trigger for you in your work? And name one thing that you could do differently to increase your sense of certainty. Or describe 2 or 3 ways in which your needs for autonomy are met or not met in performing your job today. We'll just take just a really brief time out and have you just jot a couple of ideas down for yourself. Okay, so certainly this is a risk, taking quiet time when we're on video where we can't see one another, but I hope you were able to jot a couple of ideas down. So you're getting some clarity, because that'll help set you up for when we go into the breakout rooms. The fourth characteristic of the SCARF model is the idea of relatedness, which is this sense of having safety with the people you're surrounded by, that you're a friend rather than a foe, that you're in the in group, not the out group. Relatedness is very, very important for performance. To be perceived as part of the same social group is really significant. And what's interesting is that what I find interesting is that when I perceive you as part of my in group, when you say something, I listen to you and I hear your ideas, and the same part of my brain lights up as the one that lights up when I am sharing my own thinking. And if I perceive you as outside of my group, I use a totally different brain circuit as I process what you are saying to me, which has implications for, no wonder we have to work hard to stay in conversation with someone we don't like or don't trust or disagree with vehemently. And yet what I try to get teams to understand is that if our goal is to have the best idea on the table, then we want to learn how to welcome disagreement. But do it in a way that has people still feel included rather than rejected for what they are contributing. And so this also fuels the ability to feel trust and empathize with one another on your team. And one of the profound things that I think David Rock has said is that, we can't mandate that people get along, and we can't rush it. But that these qualities develop when people's brains start to recognize former strangers as friends. And this means that we have to work together for a bit, and we have to have repeated social interactions. It doesn't have to be outside of work, but at work, the kinds of conversations, the kinds of discussions that honors people's input, so that we can get used to understanding how the other person processes information, and that we can at least have an alignment, right? And have a sense of shared values for what it is we're doing. So ideas like having working agreements on teams are very effective. Sharing goals, having shared goals, and having your team co-create those goals so that they feel a sense of ownership. It's about getting alignment on priorities. This is what drives high performance on teams. And for those of you, if you're not familiar with it, if you find this stuff fascinating, Google did a great study called the Aristotle Project, and it was in the New York Times in 2016, I think. But read that, and that's where this whole notion of psychological safety comes up. If you've heard of that, a very important dynamic for high performing teams. And then the fifth characteristic is that of fairness. That you have a perception there's a fair exchange between people on the team. So for this, it's the principle that counts, and there's a tendency to prefer equality, and when that is not experienced or perceived, that unfair resistance is deeply rooted in people. And we're certainly seeing this in all, the different kinds of social movements. Black Lives Matter is certainly bringing this up very strongly. The Portland protests and protests in other cities. Remember the Occupy movement of several years ago. Those are based on this notion of fairness. So fairness can actually be way more important than money to people. Once people are making enough money that they have their bills covered, they can put aside some, and they have enough to have a little bit of a vacation or whatever. Once they meet that minimum standard, money no longer becomes the important thing. It's these characteristics that really drive behavior. And then many can be blinded by the intensity of their fairness response, as we can see in social movements as well, but at work. And then all too common complaints about pay, performance, and transparency are linked to fairness. And once those things go on tilt, it's really challenging to get that stuff back in alignment, so people feel that they're working in a place that honors fairness for everybody. All right. So that's the overview of David Rock's SCARF model. And now what we'd like to do is invite you to go into, we're going to go into smaller groups for about, yeah, we're good on time, I think, so that we can do 15 minutes. I would ask that you make sure that each person in your group, we're going to try to have groups of 4, get airtime or an opportunity to talk. Invite you to share an insight about how one of the components of SCARF strikes you. And is there something you can do differently tomorrow based on what you've learned here about the SCARF model?
So we'll do the poll. I think everybody is coming back. Great. Good. I hope you had a good conversation. We're going to put up a quick poll to find out how large your team is, the team that you are in currently with work or with school. So I'm going to launch this poll. Hopefully you all can see it. And I'll give you about a minute. And if you could just click on your team size, that gives Pat a good idea about where we're all coming from.
Renee and I had a plan to do this at the beginning, and then I just totally forgot it. So, oh, interesting. All right, so 3 to 10. All right. 10 plus 19%. Great. And 1 to 2, 19. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's about everybody. So,
yep. Great.
Okay, great.
All right. Thank you.
Close that.
Okay. So, would love to, you can turn on your cameras and join the conversation. I'm just, I'd love to hear from 2 or 3 people. What came up for you in your group, or what struck you about today's presentation? Would anybody be willing to share that?
Sure. I mean, I was struck, working, so we work in a virtual environment, and in the age of COVID, adding new people, there's certainly a benefit of the virtual structure over wide geography in terms of autonomy, because it's automatic, but there's a disadvantage for relatedness if you don't already know the people very well. And how do you approach handling bringing on, in that environment, how do you handle building a dispersed team in this time?
Right. Is that a question, or that's what you guys talked about?
That's a question for you.
Oh, okay.
You're the expert.
No, I'm the expert in the the theory. No.
Oh, but interested in your thoughts.
Okay. There you go. Thank you. Because we're all experts, because we're all human beings in this kind of stuff. I think that what the first thing is that first and foremost, to even recognize, see, this is what I love about this framework. Now you know there's a dynamic for which you want to become more intentional, right? So one is I would have a one-on-one conversation with any new person as they come onto the team, and just ask them, get to know them, and invite them to then have one-on-one conversations with their immediate teammates, and cue the team up to say, hey, when Pat contacts you, agree to meet with her for 15, 20 minutes. Just have a coffee together and get to know one another a little bit, right? You guys can think about either 2 or 3 organizing questions you want them to cover or not, leave it up to them. But it's helping start that and normalize that notion of that initial reach out and having conversation in onboarding a new person in this way. And I think what I'm finding is that a couple of friends of mine who have gotten new jobs in doing this, once they were given that permission to just go reach out to whoever they needed to talk to feel in terms of who their job touches that they need to get to know, you just reach out and you start having those conversations. Right? This is who I am. How are you? Tell me about what you want me to know. What should I know about working here? People will give them tips, right? Does that help, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so much easier to do that when you are either geographically co-localized or
Right.
don't have, the sort of limitations on travel that we do today.
Right. But I think we're seeing that a lot of us are going to continue to be working distant, even once we get vaccines. I mean, they're just business models are changing, right? So I think it's this idea of be more intentional. What would work for you? What would you like? How would you like to be received into a new team? And ask that other person, what would work for them? How can you help them feel at ease in getting acclimated? All right, but it's a great question. Thanks. Yeah.
Pat, just one question. How would you solve the problem of status? Because that is an unsolvable problem.
That's a very good question. I don't know that it can be solved for, but I think that you can be intentional about some kinds of things. And so there's only a million scenarios I'm thinking of. So do you have a scenario in mind, Paolo?
I think about fairness is very important to address it. Fairness to everybody, but still not everybody might perceive it in that way. So
John Kennedy has a very interesting quote a gazillion years ago. If you want, I can send that to you. I'd put it on my Facebook page, but it has that notion of, when you have status and when you have power, you can either use it for the greater good, or you can use it to keep people in boxes and keep them down. And so the choice, you're at choice as to what to do with that. And of course, his belief was that the higher good is served by using your status towards a positive end, towards advancing. So his was about advancing the country, advancing knowledge, advancing opportunity, right? And we have political disagreements in our country for sure. But on a team, so when I was working at Fortune 100, vast wasteland for 13 years, I shouldn't say that. It was just dysfunctional in so many ways. But, we tended to find, you tend to create norms on your own work team as much as you can, where you can be independent of thought. And if you are a leader on a team, just be sure that, be looking for, how do you want to be treated on your team, and how do you want your team to feel about being a member of that team, and what are the norms that you all can put in place that will help everyone feel that their opinion counts, that their opinion matters, right? Regardless of what their rank is or how much they get paid. But these are things that we can change. It's those dynamics. It's inviting the team to have a conversation about that, right? Does that help?
absolutely yes. Some very good ideas you gave me. Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, good. Somebody else? Something else that came up in your conversation that would be interesting to hear?
I think one thing we talked about were two things, is that sometimes I think small companies, like most of us here are, is that there's not a lot of time for micromanaging. There's just usually too much to do. So usually everyone has a bit of autonomy because you have to spread yourself out as much as you can.
Yeah.
But we both talked about us, had instances of your last point about fairness, and both have had experiences where we were realized that we were not being paid fairly, and how negatively that really changes your opinion about the company and about the organization that you're with. And it just, in that immediate, when you find that out, it causes a shift that even, from my experience was many years ago, but I still remember it vividly. And so, and it will always kind of, color that experience. So it's an important point to remember.
Yeah. It also probably impacted your I'm guessing your willingness to go the extra mile after that.
Oh, absolutely. It totally changes your loyalty and your feeling of that you're all in this together and you're working towards a common goal, because it just really feels like you're not being valued. And even though if you can, rationalize it in terms of, well, people get hired at different times and, there might be serving a need, if you really feel like you're not being valued, it's big. It is, like you said, almost more important than the actual dollar amount was almost less important than the fact that it was occurring.
It just becomes this screen. It's like I take, it's these glasses by which I see everything now, right? And I can't escape it. Yeah, it's really, it's a fascinating part of us, and what we can do to unravel that and restructure in something very, very, very interesting. Great, thanks, Renee. Does anybody else have anything they want to bring up? Right, so then Renee Miller, before you do your final thing, although we have several people who are not on camera, I'm just, of those who are on camera and those who are not, I'm curious, raise your hand if, because we couldn't meet face-to-face in a room, and I tend to like to just give people time to ask me questions and stuff, how many of you would be, find it beneficial to just meet with me one-on-one for 15, 20 minutes to talk about either something that was particular to your workplace or particular to you that you maybe didn't feel comfortable bringing up in your conversation? Are there people who would enjoy having that opportunity? There are a few of you, great. Okay, so here's my email address. It's just really simple, pat@patarcady.com, which is PATARCADY.com.
And I just put it in the chat as well.
Oh, you just put, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
If you email me by the end of today, I will get back to you. We'll find a time, and I'd be happy to have 15, 20-minute conversation with you about whatever that particular is for you. That's kind of, I didn't know what to call it. I don't want to call it the COVID bonus because there's nothing beneficial about COVID, but it's like, I don't know, COVID compensation. How's that? I'm compensating for the fact that we have to do this by screen rather than in person. So I would be happy to do that, because when I do my work, I find that the most powerful interactions come when I also meet with my clients one-on-one, because there you can talk about things in a way, and then get clear on, when you said this about fairness, did you mean, and we can talk about that. So that's great. So give me an email and I will be happy to get back to you right away. And we can set it up this week and next. Okay.
Great. Thank
All
you,
right.
Pat.
Yeah, thank you.
There were a couple of questions in the chat, and while I'm going to those, I'm just going to launch a survey poll for everybody to fill out. There was a question early on when you mentioned knowledge workers versus non-knowledge workers. Would you clarify what is meant by that term?
Sure. It's a descriptor, a way to kind of capture folks who tend to go to an office and rather than say handle widgets or make something. That knowledge workers tend to be those who are at an office, sit at a desk, and it's kind of like what they address and manipulate tends to be information, as opposed to an object, if you will. But it's not meant as an evaluative statement. It's as a descriptive statement. Okay, so that's a great question. Sorry, I hope no one was offended by that. It's a fairly common term when we're talking about workplace environments, but okay.
Yeah.
Right. Next one.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to leave the poll up for just another few seconds, but we did have a couple of comments. One person said, we're all suffering from this pandemic. There's no bigger relatability than that. We're all kind of in the same boat, aren't we?
Yeah. So, what's interesting to me about that is how we make decisions about how much time and energy we need to give some airtime to our team about talking about that, how it's impacting us that day, acknowledging it. And yet, when does it go from enough sharing so that we're experiencing relatedness, and it kind of tilts over into whining or or just the constant, downward dive into, oh my God, isn't it awful? So those are always interesting things to think about. But to be intentional about letting people check in with one another about how are you doing today in this? Because it's very different day to day.
Yeah, definitely. And another person said, this is likely to continue for some time. So continue to work and be optimistic.
Yeah. Count your blessings where they lie. And, and this is where I think the notion of, I believe the notion of certainty comes in, is where we can't control the virus. I can't see it, smell it, taste it, touch it. So where else in my life can I have certainty so that I can at least try to augment, right? And have a sense of agency in my life where I can, and focus on that and know that I can choose to go down and think about, negative thoughts, or I can choose to stay as moderate, and I can choose to go up. It really is up to me. This is a test of mind, as well as, and that's what builds resilience, by the way, right? It's you face adversity and you figure out that I can survive it, hopefully. And then the next time something happens, the next day, the next week of this ongoing sludgy part, like, I don't know about you guys, but like, I feel like we're in the sludgy part. It's like every day feels like molasses in some way, shape, or form. And to create experiences that you have something to look forward to. I have a garage, and so we had a cookout Friday evening, and there were about 8 of us, socially distanced. We were in this big oval, but the food was in the kitchen, the grill was out, but 2 people said, thank you for creating something for me to look forward to this week, right? Because so often we don't have anything anymore to look forward to. And so that's another thing that we can do to help with that engagement with one another.
Yeah. And one last comment from Bethany said, it's really helpful to know that uncertainty requires more brain energy because it offers a valid reason why we're all so drained.
Yes.
And gives leaders a way to give permission
Yes.
for people to do self-care.
Oh, Bethany, I'm so glad you got that. Yes, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you, Pat, so much for a really awesome presentation. We really appreciate it. We appreciate Commerce Bank for sponsoring, and we appreciate all of you for coming and participating and sharing in the breakout rooms. And I just wanted to let you know, I'll send out the recording for this probably tomorrow. And so you can watch it again. And if you have any questions, you've got Pat's email in the chat. The chat should save for you. And if you don't have it or you can't find it, just email me, and I'll help you out.
All right.
Thank you so much
for coming. Thanks for sharing, and continued success. And may you all stay healthy.
Thank you, Pat.
Everybody.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.